get a secluded place off a beaten path, which really isn't hard. There's plenty of properties out there because nobody wants them, right? Because they don't fit into the hyper efficiency just in time paradigm. And so that's what goes back to the best places to be in SHTF are going to be the places that nobody wants right now. It's hard to get off grid. It becomes increasingly harder every day. They're going to be rolling out Starlink to phones soon where, you're not even going to be able to, even if you are out of cell phone range, you'll be trackable. There's thermal optics that can see you from high up. So there really is no hiding from the eye in the sky. Every military analyst I've heard is now seeing the likelihood of war well beyond the realm of, is it possible, to it's not only possible, it's probable.
Yeah, let's talk solutions here. We've laid out the mapping of the world with all these geopolitical conflicts. But I want to kick things off with this question. This is a question that I'm often asked, and I've always kind of grappled with it in my mind as well. And that is, how do you choose between, because I think I know, you've made your choice already, obviously, but how do you choose between hunkering down where you're at or within the United States and Canada or in the West versus just fleeing to another location, to let's say the Southern Hemisphere? How does one kind of weigh those options? How did you weigh that option? Why do you choose to stay in the hot zone, let's say in North America, as opposed to probably maybe going down somewhere else where it's a more neutral entity?
You got to look at, I suppose, political stability. I know some people are currently looking at, what is the country? Uruguay? I think that was
Uruguay, yeah.
Yeah. It really comes down to, no matter where you go, there's going to potentially be pros and cons. You can go to the tropics and you never have to worry about dying of the cold, but you got to worry about hurricanes and piracy and being, landlocked. And, so no matter where you go, there's going to be advantages and disadvantages. Human beings are very adaptable. I would say that for the most part, we could survive anywhere. Generally speaking, you want places of low population density, political stability, resource availability, and you also want to make sure that you will have the systems in place to sustain yourself there for prolonged periods of time. Generally, I advise people, and this might seem simplistic because most people, and I have to remind myself, are coming at this from the perspective of never doing anything preparedness oriented in their lives, which is fine. I used to be there, right? But a great place to start is with a simple survival kit. And it's an analog for everything that you're eventually going to scale up. But if you get into the vein and the algorithm of bug out bag building, it's a great way just to get acquainted with what are the vitals going to be, because most people don't know, because they've never went out and slept the night under the stars. So that they need a water filter, that they need food, that they have hygiene needs and medical needs possibly, and security needs and shelter needs and things of that nature. So start there. In terms of strategic relocation, it's a very multifaceted and complicated subject. There's people who specialize in getting people. There's a guy, in fact, who reached out to me recently. He specializes in helping people get multiple passports because, there's something to be said for that. Why I choose North America? Am I in the ideal situation? I can steel man the reasons why I shouldn't be here, and I can give you reasons why it's beneficial to stay here. North America is separated by two oceans. I think the only place that might be, I know a lot of the elites are getting places in New Zealand, but the Chinese are getting awfully close to Australia. So, I mean, there's geopolitical risks as well, which is not to say it would be easy by any stretch of the means for them to potentially do something there. There's a lot of factors to consider. So long as you can, how can I say this? Going back to that core principle, the best place to be now will be the worst place to be when things get bad. And you can really, there's a lot of places that might fit that bill, but where I live, for example, very low population density. The only potential risk would be that we're not too far from the Minuteman missile silos. So if there ever was an actual mutually assured destruction scenario unfolding, those would be targets depending on where the wind is blowing and the jet stream. It might blow some fallout our way, which wouldn't necessarily be the end of the world as it would dissipate, but it's nonetheless a risk factor for that particular scenario. But in terms of there not being a lot of people in the environment, that's always good. However, there's a reason why this is a very, sparsely populated region. And that's because it's not California where you can just eat stuff off the trees. You can grow food here, but it's going to require more technology, more greenhouse, more ingenuity. So passive solar greenhouses, things of that nature. You can do it. It's just, it requires a lot more work. So I don't have any particular ideal countries where people should go. I know that there's people who are looking at South America, but again, they're not going to be immune from this, right? From this global conflict that is going to ensue. And while they might have my criticism of the Uruguay country is they got very long borders, and I don't think they could necessarily defend those borders as much as it might be a great place to be now. I mean, I don't know enough about the politics of the countries within the region there to know how much of a risk factor that actually is. But these, and you also have to consider too, like if you don't speak the language of a place, you don't understand the culture, you're going to be at a disadvantage in that respect. So it's probably best to stick with what but go somewhere within that country. That's my personal opinion. I mean, the United States is a bounty it's a massive country. It is, we have all types of biomes and topography and places that aren't, very heavily populated. I mean, there's places that I was looking at in Montana and, just places in the Midwest, but kind of closer to the mountains that are just, would be pristine, ideal places to be. So, but, there's books on strategic relocation. If a person is interested in exploring that, we've done videos on it where we go point by point over all the factors that you would want to consider. Generally speaking, you want to be off the beaten path a few turns. You don't want to be off a major highway. You want to be, a little bit off the beaten path. Gray man is better than standing out. There's kind of two philosophies. One is you want to look very militaristic and menacing so people don't mess with you. The other strategy is to try to blend in as much as possible. But then of course you still run the risk of being a target. But yeah, I mean, just being discreet, being low key, don't start a YouTube channel and get 1.3 million subscribers who know everything about you. It's kind of a sacrifice that I've had to come to terms with, and it's been a progressive thing. So it wasn't just, out of nowhere, but, keeping things low key. So the Cybertruck is a great embodiment of something that it's a Faustian bargain in the sense that it's a great piece of technology for a disaster. I mean, you have everything that you would on a 4-wheel drive truck. You have something that's rechargeable, doesn't require a lot of maintenance. It can stop small caliber fire. it can do a lot of cool things, but it stands out like a sore thumb. And now people are starting to realize that it's also a security risk because of all the civil disputes surrounding it. So, there's no cut and dry answer for these things. I think a person, if they're adaptable, you can probably survive anywhere. Granted, there's low population density and a relatively stable amount of resource availability. If you can have those two things, then you can pretty much make it work anywhere, I would say. But in terms of actually getting a location, you're going to want to make sure there's a water source. That's fundamental. I mean, it doesn't have to be an above ground water source. You can get wells. Most places in North America, there's a chance that there's groundwater. It's not always going to be the best groundwater. It could be somewhat saline. And then you run the risk of, there's other complicating factors there with respect to that. The growing season is a factor. If you're talking about long term, it takes a lot of machines and work to really build out a sustainable homestead to modern standards. You can do it with a horse and plow, but nobody's gonna do that, right? So there are turnkey solutions. We've interviewed numerous guests on the channel before who offer different types of consulting and services on how to build out a homestead, and they'll walk you through every, all the security aspects to consider and that sort of thing.
You're looking for great deals on gold and silver coins and bars from a company that you can trust, then you've got to check out the good folks over at Pimbex. This year, I've really gotten to know these guys, and all I can say is you're not going to deal with a better group of people. They're a family-owned gold and silver online bullion company offering the essentials and more at industry-leading prices while always providing first-class top-tier service. That's PIMBEX.com. And if you're looking to convert some or all of your retirement account into real gold and silver, give Pimbex a call. They'll help explain the process and get you started on the right path. Your support at Pimbex also helps support the channel. So reach out to Pimbex today. You won't be disappointed. And make sure to tell them Danny sent you. Where do you lie between really building out a fortress or having something a little more discreet? I know Joel Scalzon, who you've interviewed a number of times. I've also interviewed him a number of times as well. He's kind of the proponent of, you build out like essentially a fortress. And then I believe there's other voices in the space who say, well, no, you want to be a little bit more discreet than that. You don't want people to know that you have a Fortress Canadian Prep or Fortress Nate, right down the street. And then if you want to build out like one of these bunkers, I mean, you're going to bring in a whole construction, a whole crew to to bulldoze the trees and dig things up, and you draw a lot of attention to yourself. How do you actually build out like a sturdy fortress for times of great hardship when by that same token you draw all this attention to yourself, which you obviously don't want? I mean, you've already drawn enough attention to yourself with your 1 million plus subscribers, but for the non-influencer out there, how can they balance the two?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically piece by piece. You're going to be relying on people's poor memories. In most cases, you're going to be doing a lot of stuff yourself. I mean, and this is the part that a lot of people who have the means in order to do a lot of this stuff, which is a very, very small portion of the population, I should add, they struggle with, because you're the one who's going to be hauling out the shipping containers and the heavy equipment, and you're going to be doing a lot of that work, or it's going to have to be people you trust. So you're going to have to vet people before that. Now, in terms of building bunkers and things of that nature, there are ways that they do that. They fly people in from other parts of the country, so it just would be really, it would be impractical for them to pose a security risk for you. And most people are just working, they're not paying attention, and they're going to forget. And when an emergency arises, they're not going to be like, oh, I know so-and-so. In terms of the fortress mindset, yeah, I mean, there's two philosophies. One is the hunker down turtling philosophy of me versus the world. I would say you're only doing that if you're good with the community and you have a very large group that is going to be able to support you. Because if you take that approach where, okay, I'm going to take the opposite of the gray man approach and build a fortress, then you need to be able to defend that property. And the only way you do that is with a large group, because ultimately it's going to be a numbers game, right? And now, if you're the more discreet approach is probably better for most people, and that's just to get a secluded place off a beaten path, which really isn't hard. There's plenty of properties out there because nobody wants them, right? Because they don't fit into the hyper efficiency just in time paradigm. And so that's what it goes back to. The best places to be in SHTF are going to be the places that nobody wants right now, right? Because they're going to be the most opportune places to be. There was a TV show recently. I interviewed the director. It's called Homestead, and the actual homestead in the TV show is a real place, and they're real preppers, and everybody knows them, and they're just outside of Salt Lake City. And their whole strategy is different. They have a strategy of, we have a very large group. Yes, everybody knows we're here. And, I believe that they're religious as well. So, they have this mandate that to help people, which, may serve them well or comes with a lot of security risk also. But there's different approaches to take. But I would say only put yourself out there if you're ready to truly defend that. And understand that there are trained operators who will get together with their groups, and these guys know what they're doing. They know how to, infiltrate, no matter how secure the compound, right? And so that's what you're going to be up against. And so you got to factor. So it's really just better for nobody to know where you're at. And most of the security consultants will tell you that you don't want to get in a position where you need a castle unless it's a really good castle and you have a lot of people to help you defend that castle. So those are the kind of two general
turrets on the balconies and at the top of on the roof of the castle wouldn't hurt either.
What's that?
I said a few turrets on the roof of the castle, maybe some on the balcony wouldn't hurt either.
Maybe AI and automation will permit the auto turrets like they had in Alien at some point. But I wouldn't bank on it, at least not right now anyways. I mean, we might not be too far from that point though, whether that's a technology that will be permitted to civilians. I mean, I know you're being facetious, but there's something there, right? Like, technology is a component of this that we have to contend with. And now you're contending with drones. So, it's hard to get off grid. It becomes increasingly harder every day. They're going to be rolling out Starlink to phones soon, where, you're not even going to be able to, even if you are out of cell phone range, you'll be trackable. There's thermal optics that can see you from high up. So there really is no hiding from the eye in the sky. And these are technologies that will be employed in these situations. I mean, smart groups of, trained military people are going to use drones. I mean, that's evident now in what's happening in Ukraine, and it's created this whole other dimension of warfare. And so prepping isn't what it was even 10 years ago. So
yeah, there's these two scenarios that really elicit a prepper mindset. It's this Mad Max scenario on one hand, and then there's the kind of dystopic scenario that what you would probably get in times of war. Once this world war does kick off, expect martial law and expect the belt to be tightened significantly. Yeah. So how do you prepare for? I mean, it seems like we've been talking about the Mad Max scenario throughout the course of this video, but what about like this technocratic dystopic scenario? Especially like, let's say during wartime, because we did also mention all the wars kind of crescendoing into one big world war. And then once that happens, all hell, I mean,
Yeah.
everything's
You're dealing with the government going authoritarian, and that is the scariest thought. That's what I think a lot of preppers want to avoid thinking about, because that's going to be the biggest threat, the bureaucrat that comes knocking, trying to expropriate your stuff when the shit hits the fan, right? And so it just goes back to being discreet about a lot of things. Fortunately, governments are not very good at what they do. Even, the wholesale coercion and possibly worse that they will do to their population. But yeah, that's true that we've been kind of focusing on this Mad Max scenario. The dystopian scenario is far more complicated and unsavory to talk about, because I would actually venture to say that at least with the Mad Max scenario, you have a certain degree of agency over what happens, which you don't have in a slow crackdown, right? Which is more likely. However, there could be some flashpoint, flashbulb event that ensues. To prepare for that, I mean, I think it's generally you want to have self-sustaining systems in place so that you don't have to be beholden to, whatever they're going to force you to do or take in order to get what you need, because that's what it's going to come down to. If you want to buy eggs, you're going to have to take such and such a shot, or you're going to have to you're going to have to scan this app, or, so the more self-sustaining systems you have in place, then the less, like even here, like if you want to get electricity out to an acreage, everything has to be, approved, and, you get all these, there's all this red tape in doing that. Right. And that makes you dependent on the government, but you could just put in your own solar system independent of the grid. It's only if you want to tap into the grid and either have a situation where you're you're getting power from the grid to supplement your solar system, or you're putting power back into the grid, that you need to even go there at all. So yeah, having those systems in place, keeping a low key, being discreet about it, and there's plenty of ways to do that, but I think the natural tendency is to want to tweet about things and want to, take selfies of the homestead and, broadcast it across the airwaves, which of course now there's technology that can pinpoint just based on a few trees, and how they relate to the side of the road where you're at. So yeah, it's a very complicated situation, and it's more of a question that a lot of your guests would be better fit to answer with respect to offering financial advice, because really that's a question of austerity and how do you hedge against inflation, and but there's also a component of, well, if you want to eat food of your choosing that is not that is not basically dictated by the government in terms of how it's made and what's put in it, then you should have those systems in place. Your ability to grow food is fundamental. As uninteresting and non-exciting as it might be, it's just par for the course. And unfortunately, this is something that a lot of people don't want to commit to, because it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work to maintain a garden and to keep chickens, and and to have to take care of your own security needs and things of that nature. Yeah, so it's potentially, it could go a lot of ways. The extent of the authoritarianism that's going to present itself, nobody knows. It could get fairly bad if we're looking what's happening in Ukraine. I mean, how do you prepare for a situation like
And
that?
it's kind of worse than authoritarianism. It's totalitarianism, which means it's ubiquitous. It's the authoritarianism becomes ubiquitous all around us because of all of these technologies we're funneling our data into.
Yes, and so you you have a situation where, you're going to be there's going to be this pressure from the event itself, and then there's going to be your own government. So going back to the Ukraine war example, I don't know how a person who is living in Bakhmut could, for example, could ever have prepared. I mean, there was nothing unless you have a really good bunker that's very well hidden.
Right.
There's going to be gunfire over top of your head. Now, is it ever going to get to that point here? It's hard to say, but the biggest fear there is being scooped off the street and sent to die in a trench. Some people are for that. Some people are very patriotic there and they want to fight for their country. Others are, they have the reasons for not believing in the cause. And so they're trying to avoid it, but they can't avoid it. So most definitely the totalitarian component is amplified by the massive surveillance state, which currently exists, in which everything is known about. Even if you were to stockpile things like precious metals, there's a good chance that there's a paper trail. There's a potential for confiscation of those things. That's becoming increasingly more common in the conversations that I have from a lot of the gold bugs that I bring on the channel. Is they're concerned about confiscation. The best piece of advice I've had along those lines is avoid bullion and just go with the coins and stuff, because once you get into the bigger stuff, that's probably what they're going to come after if they do go down that road. But yeah, it's one of the biggest, it's something that a lot of preppers don't want to think about, is what happens when the government comes knocking, and SHTF hasn't happened yet, right? That's the biggest concern, because it's inevitable that that's going to happen. And it's just something we have to bridge we're going to have to cross when we get there, I guess. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I'm in agreement with you. I think this is it's a lot more worrying, because now you're not just dealing with the uncertainties of nature and the few survivors out there who are scouring the land for food and things like that. You're dealing with an organized army, an organized military that has resources that you could never prep for. I mean, drone technology. I mean, what are you going to do there with your shotgun? Like, are you going to shoot down? Like they just drone attack your house if they have to. So it's
I mean, shotguns, they are actually surprisingly effective at taking out drones. But I mean, to your point, you're not going to be able to do that indefinitely, and especially if you have a limited amount of manpower. There might be certain situations, though, where the government, in their incompetence, are stretched far too thin, and you just have a situation like Mexico where it's just run by gangs, or parts of Mexico, not all of Mexico. But you know what I mean, where it turns into this fiefdoms of excessive rule of law, pockets of excessive rule of law amidst the sea of lawlessness and anarchy. That's probably what it's going to be. So it's going to be some blend of the two things, of Mad Max and the dystopia that you talk about. And, it generally just comes down to, it's all about energy, and prepping is all about stockpiling energy in its multitude of forms, whether that's cans of food, actual fuel, ammunition. It's about having the energy to ride out austerity or worse. And if you can have those regenerative systems in place, the more regenerative, the better. But even if you can just stockpile energy, I mean, it's a really small investment. I mean, it's incredible to me that you'll have people who, maybe have a $20,000 watch, right? But they don't have more than 7 days worth of food stored. They just presume, and it's an optimism bias. I mean, I understand all the psychological barriers that prevent people from wanting to address these realities, but it's such an easy problem for a lot of people who watch your channel. Like, it's easy. Like,
and there is this impression that America is kind of still a bastion of hope, because I mean, look at what Trump's trying to do with his golden citizenship thing. He's trying to make it seem like
It's the
it's
arc.
so horrible out there. You guys need to come in here, come into Fortress America. You don't have to stay in Europe. By the way, a lot of high net worth individuals are getting the hell out of Europe and the UK. And I know this from, people that I talk to that have mentioned this off camera and off the record, people that they know.
Yeah.
So money is fleeing Europe. Now, money can also be fleeing other places in the world. But, last time I checked, the U.S. was antagonizing a whole bunch of different people out there, a whole bunch of different countries out there. So we kind of still have a target on our back, despite the fact that we are separated by two big oceans. But we did have our borders wide open the last 4 years, more than 4 years, actually. I believe it's somewhere along the lines of 10 to 20 million unaccounted for that have entered the United States. And all it really takes is for, a few people here and there to hijack the water systems, to mess around with some of the key resources that so many people are dependent upon through subterfuge. And the you can really, it's asymmetric. All it takes is relatively low effort to create a high impact event. So
and they're really selling it as this arc concept, like you're saying. I mean, there is money that's fleeing Europe. There's also a pumping of the European stock markets right now as a result of war mobilization. So there's kind of two components to that. But yes, the American system is incredibly vulnerable. I've always said it's a glass house. And it is a potential bastion for sleeper cells and all types of asymmetrical warfare against the critical infrastructure that is not hardened and is not built to be resilient with all these safeguards in place. So you're right that there's very low effort things that could trigger very high impact events, and most people are not prepared for that. We don't really know, and this is where
I've heard this from like a number of European based guests that I have on my show off the record and off camera. And I mean, they're concerned about staying in Europe for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And they're highly considering moving to the United States. And I'm just not, you may be jumping from the fire into the frying pan, but you're still, it's better than it's better the opposite way, but you're still being fried, potentially here in the States. But who knows where things transpire. But I totally agree with you. It's the dystopian aspect that could come about through authoritarianism or totalitarianism over a world war is a lot more worrying to me than the Mad Max. I mean, I still have that on my radar screen, but that's the more pressing concern for me, at least.
Yeah, there's a false sense of security that there's a general abundance of resources in North America, and there's lower than average amounts of people. So that's what's driving the, and then of course there's a protection of two oceans, but that doesn't mean that the systems aren't vulnerable. And because it's a glass house, in contrast to authoritarian societies where they're very guarded with the firewalls, the various firewalls that they have in place, which we don't have in place, in times of economic hardship and global disaster, they thrive. This model that we have, the free market model, thrives when times are good because it benefits, it pays to have an open, free society in which, generally speaking, maybe not to have such porous borders, but to have, the ability to, for the world to connect and to see what's going on. But it's a one-way mirror. When you look at the Chinese can look and they can see everything that's happening in the United States. We can't see what's happening there. I mean, we don't know what's happening in China at all, right? So it's not really a fair transaction. So in that respect, I totally understand, the Trump point of view in that there is an imbalance there, especially with the Chinese, and which is why I've always and it's not been a popular opinion on the channel, but I understand why they want to ban TikTok, because if we had an app there that did the same thing, then that would be, kind of a level playing field. But the fact is we don't. So we don't know what sort of cultural manipulation is happening. We don't know what sort of data is being harvested. But TikTok is a great example of that. And then you could extrapolate that out to everything else. And like you said, the 10 to 20 million undocumented immigrants, even if a few hundred were rogue elements with dirty bombs, who knows what, it could be very destabilizing. And we know that you only need to take out a very small amount of the transformers in the United States to bring down the power grid, and they're all made in China. So yeah, there's so many vulnerabilities, and even cyber is in and of itself, that single thing could bring down the entire system. So you're not safe necessarily in the United States, but I would say generally speaking, yeah, you're probably safer than you are in Europe. Relatively. But that assumes that there's going to be a conventional war in Europe that is not going to result to something nuclear on a global scale, which I also find hard to believe. Like, I also don't think the United States would permit Europe to be turned into a wasteland without doing something that would bring about a response upon the United States as well. Now, there's conflicting theories about that. I've heard theories suggest that, well, there's two camps. One is for the destruction of Europe and to be used as a sacrificial lamb of sorts, and another that contradicts that point of view. So yeah, it's hard to also see a scenario, and why I would see them wanting to leave Europe is maybe they just think it's untenable and it's economically not the best place to be, as opposed to just, full-blown war, which is very possible when you have the UK and France posturing in the way they are towards the Russians. I mean, I don't think it's well within the realm of possibility, and pretty much every conservative, and I don't say it in the political sense, I mean it in the sense of being non-alarmist and reserved in their projections. Every military analyst I've heard is now seeing the likelihood of war well beyond the realm of, is it possible, to it's not only possible, it's probable and it's likely. So that's where we are. There's going to be and it's the question of why. Well, it's probably a lot to do with resource scarcity. It's resources, and Europe doesn't have the resources it needs. It needs Russia's resources by hook or by crook. And I think that ultimately somebody has to win. And until that happens, we'll be in a Cold War, and that Cold War could go hot at any minute. So, what more motivation does somebody need to be a prepper? I just really don't understand. I mean, I understand that most people watch things like wrestling and spend 3 hours on TikTok every day, but and maybe it's a Darwinian thing, maybe just some people aren't meant to survive.
There's definitely a genetic component to it, for sure.
What's that?
I said there's definitely a genetic component to it, because some people are just risk averse. Some people are risk tolerant. I mean, they just don't see the risk. I mean, I think that's, I forget what the gene is called for it, but there's like a specific dichotomy between those two groups of people. Again, I don't remember the name for it exactly, but it definitely does exist.
Yeah, it might factor into it. It's possible. But, I just hope that people walk away from this conversation with the motivation to prepare, because that's the fundamental thing. And oftentimes what happens is there'll be a major event that happens, and then everybody will take an interest in prepping. And that should not be what motivates you to prep, right? Because that's not going to be an enduring motivational factor. It's almost got to be intrinsic. And like you're saying, perhaps it stems from something that's genetic, but it has to be an intrinsic motivation, not an extrinsic motivation. And if you're a person who is just looking at the news and you need that to kind of constantly, there's going to be periods, throughout the next few months where it's going to seem like nothing's happening, right? And now this doesn't mean that you want to live in a perpetual state of fear either. You don't want to be that person. You want to enjoy life. You want to experience life. You want to, just be out there and spend time with your family and friends and joke and laugh and be entertained and all those great things. I mean, no, at least I'm not, promoting anything that goes against that idea. But just understand that just because, it's not constant bad news doesn't mean you should relent, because preppers are made just like champions in the off season. And you have to buy. It's the same principle with the economy. You buy low and you sell high. So you don't panic buy when everybody's FOMOing in. You want to make those decisions and that's when things are going to be cheapest too. Like, good luck finding, toilet paper in 2020 or a gas mask, in 2020. You would have paid probably twice the amount and maybe never got it. So you want to be doing these things and we know that it's evident that bad things are coming our way. So, at least to me, it is.
You want to make these decisions when you're clear-headed. So
exactly, yes.
As opposed to when you're like in a panic state,
yeah,
you may not end up making the best decisions in that kind of headspace. But
if it's driven by the amygdala, then you're going to be making some very hasty decisions that are not going to be the most sound ones to make. So
totally. Well, great place to end things off on here, Nate. Anything else you want to talk about actually before we wrap up? Otherwise, go ahead and drop us your socials and where people can hear and see more of you.
Yeah, Canadian Prepper is the YouTube channel. That's where you go. That's the only place I'll direct people to. And I'll just say that, there's plenty of information out there. All of the information, not just from my channel, but others, in terms of the how-to stuff. The how-to is easy. It's the why that's the hard part, bringing people to the why. How-to is abundant. Okay, you can download apps, books. You can download all of Wikipedia onto an app, in fact. So the information is out there, but just take it seriously because, as I said initially, there is a confluence of events that are about to unfold that if you don't prepare beforehand, then you're going to be at an extreme disadvantage. So I just hope that, the people who watch this walk away feeling a little bit more motivated to prepare. If they did that, then I would say that my work is done here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Just really quick, one more question, because this is something I've noticed with your most recent guests is that they're all predicting the start of World War III along three different theaters of war: the European theater, the Middle Eastern theater, and then the Asian Pacific theater.
They're all connected.
If you had to bet $1, which theater of war does World War III kick off from?
Well, because it's all connected, we're already in a world war. It's just kind of a positioning. It's like a game of Risk at this point in time. But like I said, Iran is the linchpin. So if they start something there, it is going to have repercussions everywhere else. And it's just going to accelerate, every other theater of conflict. That's all it can possibly do. It creates power vacuums. It creates more instability. It creates more austerity. Countries are incentivized to rally around the flag more in times of austerity and trade wars and embargoes and things of that nature. So I would venture to say at this point that when they antagonize and instigate something with Iran, that could potentially drastically accelerate the war with Russia. And it may, in fact, China has been incredibly silent. We don't know what their plans are. They wrote The Art of War. And if we go by The Art of War, we can presume that they're going to strike like a thunderbolt when we're least expected. And they have the means to do that they're amassing. Are they entirely ready from a naval military point of view? I'm not an expert on that, but it doesn't appear that way that they are. But again, it's really a powder keg. And the thing to just realize is there really is not going to be an official start date to World War III, right? Like, it's not like even the World War I and World War II, you could say it was the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. And these are arbitrary lines in the sands that historians have drawn. We're in it right now. And that's the reality that people need to grasp. Just because there's not a nuke that's been dropped yet. Once that first nuke is dropped, though, if the United States does use tactical nuclear weapons in Iran, that is going to break the seal. And you're just going to have nuclear proliferation and the normalization of low yield nuclear weaponry that is going to completely change things. And of course, it's going to potentially give the opposition every justification to flip the table. And by that, I mean activate all the sleeper cells that exist. And we would be very naive to think that they're not here, because why wouldn't they be? I mean, I think about it. It would not be hard, right? It's just a matter of, will those sleeper cells, when the time comes, be motivated enough to see the mission through? And so, yeah, I mean, that's why I talk about day X, because all these things are kind of wired, right? And it's like day X happens when basically there is no more room. Like, how can I say, we're kind of going back, and we're trying to wrap up this interview, but day X happens when sides realize that there is no other alternative, and that if they don't use it, they're going to lose it. And so something similar could happen with Russia and Ukraine as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of what happened with Syria. Syria had a similar tunnel system, and they never used it. And so now they lost it. And I'm sure Iran is looking at that use case. And
Russia, up until this point, they've exhibited a lot of strategic forbearance, because I think in the hopes that they would win the long game, like the attritional war. And but that also reaches a point, like a breaking point. And so with the negotiations between Trump and Putin, eventually you reach a point where they can't, it's all a stalling tactic, right? So eventually they reach a point where they can no longer stall, and somebody has to make a move that oversteps the boundaries of the other. And I think they're trying. That's why Putin wants to postpone the face-to-face meeting, because so long as that is out there as a potential, it's a relief valve, right? As soon as they do that and it goes wrong, or nothing good comes out of it, which nothing would, then all bets are off. So, that would be as we approach the day where people run out of options and they have no choice. And right now, Russia's in a position where they have to be viewing this as being groomed for a decapitation strike, because they've had Ukraine flying these drones into their airspace for the last 2 years. They're starting to map out using AI and all this stuff. So they're increasingly at a disadvantage and susceptible strategically to NATO in a way that, they don't, Russia is not flying drones into Europe. I mean, they are in certain places, but certainly not in the amounts. And all of that information is being relayed back to the Ukrainians about the Russians, because ideally what Trump and Europe would love would be to take Russia out, take them down with one fell swoop, in the same way that they did, Nasrallah and Hezbollah. And that would be ideal because, so long as they could capture the government thereafter. And I think there's probably contingency plans for that, to do that. And so long as Vladimir Putin tolerates these incursions into their airspace and all of the stuff that NATO has been doing, that the greater the disadvantage and the greater the likelihood that they would succeed in such an operation. So it's why I think that these things are eventually coming to a head. And this is why I think this is the primary driver of gold, to be honest, is the multipolarity. So, just keep on stacking, I guess. That's my final word of advice.
All right. What better way to end things off than those few words? Keep on stacking, folks. All right, Nate, thank you so much for coming on, my friend. A great pleasure having you on. If you guys enjoyed this podcast, be sure to give us a like and comment. Go, Nate, go in the comment section. If you disagreed with anything, however, do let me know as well. I do read the comments. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss an episode. And check us out on Substack. It's capitalcosm.substack.com, where you can get early access and ad-free versions of all of my videos, as well as uncensored versions for the videos that warrant it. And with all that said, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode. Bye, y'all.